The relationship between Hamas and Israel is one of deep-seated animosity and recurring violence. This conflict is rooted in a complex web of historical grievances, territorial disputes, and competing national aspirations. Understanding this tumultuous history is crucial to grasping the gravity of the recent Hamas attack on Israel. The seeds of this conflict were sown in the early 20th century during the British Mandate for Palestine. Jewish immigration to the region, fueled by Zionist aspirations for a Jewish homeland, created tensions with the existing Arab population. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War led to the creation of the State of Israel, but also resulted in the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. This displacement, known as the Nakba, or catastrophe by Palestinians, forms a core element of the Palestinian narrative and continues to fuel resentment and resistance. The Six-Day War in 1967 saw Israel capture the West Bank and Gaza Strip, further complicating the conflict and solidifying Israel's control over Palestinian territories. The subsequent decades witnessed a cycle of violence marked by Palestinian uprisings, Israeli military responses, and failed peace initiatives. The Oslo Accords in the 1990s offered a glimmer of hope for a negotiated settlement, but ultimately failed to bridge the deep divides between the two sides. Hamas, an acronym for the Islamic Resistance Movement, emerged from the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood in the late 1980s during the First Intifada. The Intifada, a Palestinian uprising against Israeli occupation, provided fertile ground for the growth of Hamas, which quickly gained popularity among Palestinians disillusioned with the secular Fatah movement. Hamas's charter, published in 1988, explicitly calls for the destruction of Israel and the establishment of an Islamic State in all of historic Palestine. The organization views armed resistance as a legitimate means to achieve its goals and rejects any compromise with Israel. Hamas combines its militant agenda with a social welfare network providing education, healthcare, and other services to Palestinians in Gaza. This dual approach has enabled Hamas to build a strong base of support, particularly among the impoverished and marginalized. Hamas's rise to prominence has had a profound impact on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, adding a new layer of complexity to an already intractable situation. Its uncompromising stance towards Israel and its willingness to use violence have made it a key player in the region's volatile dynamics. Hamas employs a range of tactics and strategies in its conflict with Israel, reflecting its ideology, capabilities, and the constraints of its operational environment. These tactics can be broadly categorized into two main areas: armed attacks and political mobilization. Armed attacks constitute a central pillar of Hamas's strategy, aiming to inflict casualties, sow fear among Israelis, and maintain pressure on the Israeli government. Hamas possesses a significant arsenal of rockets, mortars, and other projectiles which it launches from Gaza into Israel. These rocket attacks, while often lacking precision and causing relatively low casualties, have a significant psychological impact on Israeli civilians and disrupt daily life. Hamas has also invested in developing longer-range rockets capable of reaching major Israeli cities, increasing its threat perception. In addition to rocket attacks, Hamas utilizes a network of tunnels dug beneath the Gaza-Israel border for various purposes. These tunnels serve as infiltration routes for militants to carry out attacks inside Israel, provide logistical support to Hamas fighters, and facilitate the smuggling of weapons and other goods into Gaza. The morning of October 7, 2023 will forever be etched in the annals of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a day of unprecedented violence and terror. Hamas, in a meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed attack, shattered the illusion of calm that had settled over the region, unleashing a wave of shock and horror. As the sun rose over Israel, Hamas militants, exploiting the cover of darkness and the element of surprise, launched a multi-pronged assault on Israeli soil. The attack commenced with a massive barrage of rockets fired from Gaza, targeting Israeli towns and cities in a display of firepower unmatched in recent memory. Simultaneously, Hamas commandos, utilizing their intricate network of tunnels, infiltrated Israeli territory at multiple points along the Gaza border. Emerging from their subterranean strongholds, these heavily armed militants sowed chaos and carnage, attacking civilian targets with indiscriminate brutality. The Israeli town of Sderot, located just across the border from Gaza and accustomed to Hamas rocket fire, bore the brunt of the initial assault. Sirens wailed as a relentless barrage of rockets rained down, forcing residents to seek shelter in bomb shelters and safe rooms. As the day progressed, the full scale and audacity of Hamas's attack became horrifyingly clear. Hamas fighters stormed Israeli military bases, engaged in fierce firefights with Israeli soldiers, and took hostages, further deepening the sense of shock and vulnerability within Israel. Section 5 Israel retaliates, a nation under siege responds. The Hamas attack on October 7, 2023 sent shockwaves through Israeli society, evoking memories of past wars and acts of terrorism. The scale and audacity of the attack, which included a massive rocket barrage, cross-border raids, and the taking of hostages, left Israelis reeling in shock and disbelief. The Israeli government, caught off guard by the ferocity and sophistication of the Hamas offensive, vowed swift and decisive retaliation. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, addressing the nation in a televised address, declared war on Hamas, promising to unleash the full might of the Israeli Defense Forces to crush the militant group. As darkness fell, Israeli warplanes roared into action, launching airstrikes on targets across the Gaza Strip. The deafening explosions illuminated the night sky as Israeli missiles targeted Hamas military infrastructure, including rocket launchers, command centers, and training camps. The IDF also mobilized ground forces along the Gaza border, preparing for a potential ground invasion of the densely populated enclave. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, and artillery units moved into position, transforming the once quiet border region into a scene of impending warfare. Within hours of the initial Hamas attack, the IDF launched a counter-offensive, deploying special forces units into Gaza to hunt down Hamas militants and secure the release of hostages. These elite units, operating under a veil of secrecy, engaged in fierce firefights with Hamas fighters, often in densely populated urban areas. Section 6. The world reacts. A chorus of condemnation and concern. The Hamas attack on Israel on October 7, 2023 sent shockwaves across the globe, drawing condemnation from world leaders, international organizations, and people of all faiths and nationalities. The attack, which targeted civilians and violated international law, was widely denounced as a barbaric act of terrorism. The United States, Israel's closest ally, condemned the attack in the strongest possible terms. President Joe Biden, in a phone call with Prime Minister Netanyahu, expressed unwavering support for Israel's right to defend itself and promised to provide all necessary assistance. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency meeting to address the escalating crisis. However, efforts to adopt a joint statement condemning the Hamas attack were stymied by disagreements among member states, highlighting the complexities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on the world stage. European leaders, while condemning the Hamas attack, also expressed concern about the humanitarian situation in Gaza and called for restraint from both sides. The European Union urged Israel to exercise proportionality in its response and to avoid civilian casualties. The Arab world, deeply divided over the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, responded to the Hamas attack with a mixture of condemnation and muted support. Some Arab states, such as Egypt and Jordan, which have peace treaties with Israel, condemned the attack and called for de-escalation. Section 7 Gaza, a humanitarian catastrophe unfolds. The Israeli military's retaliation for Hamas attacks turned Gaza's dire situation into a catastrophe. Bombardment and blockade transformed Gaza into an open-air prison with civilians suffering most. Airstrikes targeting Hamas often caused collateral damage, destroying homes, hospitals, and schools. Gaza City's streets became rubble-strewn landscapes filled with debris and shattered lives. Power outages plunged Gaza into darkness, crippling essential services. Hospitals, overwhelmed and operating on backup generators, struggled with the influx of wounded. The Israeli blockade restricted essential goods, pushing Gaza to the brink of a humanitarian crisis. Section 8, The Future of Peace, a Distant Hope. The recent Hamas attack on Israel and the ensuing Israeli retaliation have dealt a devastating blow to the already faint hopes for a lasting peace in the region. The cycle of violence, deeply ingrained in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, has once again reared its ugly head. The attack has hardened attitudes on both sides, making meaningful dialogue and reconciliation even more remote. The international community, deeply divided, appears powerless to break the cycle of violence. The peace process, moribund for over a decade, now lies in ruins. The two-state solution, once seen as the only viable path to peace, now appears increasingly elusive. The future remains bleak, with no easy solutions in sight.